Have you ever thought about how one single event can change the entire world? In 1258, a catastrophe struck. The Mongol army, under Hulagu Khan, laid siege to Baghdad, the glorious capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. What followed was one of history's greatest cultural disasters. The city was razed, its people massacred, and its libraries, including the legendary House of Wisdom, were utterly destroyed. It is said the Tigris River ran black with the ink of countless books and red with the blood of scholars. This wasn't just the fall of a city. It was the end of an era, the heart of the Islamic Golden Age ripped out. But what if it never happened? What if, for some reason, a political crisis back in the Mongol heartland, a surprisingly strong Abbasid defense, or even a last-minute diplomatic miracle, the Mongols had bypassed Baghdad, leaving it untouched? This isn't just a minor tweak to history. This is a fundamental rewrite of our world. Let's imagine a timeline where Baghdad, the center of Islamic political and intellectual life, survived. First, the Abbasid Caliphate itself would endure as a real, functioning political power, not just a symbolic title held by shadow caliphs in Egypt. It would have remained the ultimate symbol of authority in the Sunni Islamic world, a central rallying point against both the remaining Mongol threats and the European crusaders in the Levant. With a unified leadership, the defense of the Middle East could have been far more coordinated and effective. This brings us to the Mamluks of Egypt. Historically, they rose to prominence as the saviors of Islam after they defeated the Mongols at Ain Jalut, shortly after Baghdad's fall. But with a powerful caliph still ruling from Baghdad, the Mamluks might have remained a regional power, subservient to the caliph. The entire political landscape of the Middle East would be less fragmented. Perhaps the great rivalries between the Mamluks, the Persian Safavids, and the Ottoman Turks might never have escalated in the way they did centuries later. A strong central caliphate could have acted as a stabilizing force, mediating disputes and preventing the region from splintering into competing empires. And what about the Mongols? The conquest of Baghdad was the crown jewel of their western campaign. Without that ultimate victory, the Mongol Ilkhanate in Persia might have fractured sooner or turned its ambitions elsewhere. The mass conversion of the Mongol rulers to Islam, which was heavily influenced by the shock of controlling the former heart of the caliphate, might have happened much more slowly or taken a completely different path. Baghdad's survival would have been a permanent check on their power and prestige. Now, let's talk about the most exciting part, the preservation of knowledge. The House of Wisdom, or Beit al-Hikmah, wasn't just a library. It was a vibrant academy, a translation center, and a scientific institution. It was the engine of the Islamic Golden Age. Think of the hundreds of thousands of books on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and literature that were lost forever. In our alternate timeline, they survive. The works of classical Greek thinkers, which were preserved and built upon in Baghdad, would continue to be studied and expanded. With the caliphs continuing their patronage of science, state-funded observatories, hospitals, and universities would not only continue, but flourish. Imagine what could have been achieved. We might have seen more advanced breakthroughs in algebra, optics, and engineering centuries before they occurred in Europe. The intricate clockwork mechanisms and automata that fascinated the Abbasid court could have evolved into even more sophisticated technologies. This sustained golden age wouldn't just be preserving old knowledge. It would be creating new knowledge at an accelerated pace. And here's a game changer, the printing press. The Abbasids knew about block printing from their contact with Tang China, but they never adopted it on a mass scale. In a world where the demand for scholarly and religious texts is at an all-time high, and with a stable, wealthy caliphate backing it, the impetus for mass printing might have finally arrived. Imagine block-printed or even movable type presses churning out books in Baghdad in the 13th or 14th century. This would have revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge within the Islamic world, long before Gutenberg. And through trade, that technology would have inevitably reached Europe, potentially speeding up its own renaissance. Baghdad would have remained the undisputed cultural capital of the world. A multicultural, cosmopolitan metropolis where Arab, Persian, Christian, and Jewish scholars and merchants lived and worked together. Historically, after its fall, the center of Islamic culture shifted to Cairo, Damascus, and later, Istanbul. But in this timeline, Baghdad would continue to set the standard for architecture, poetry, and learning, its influence radiating across 3 continents. This cultural and religious cohesion would have profound effects. With the Caliph as a strong, central authority, doctrinal disputes within Sunni Islam could have been managed more effectively. The existential shock of 1258 led to a more rigid and defensive intellectual posture in the centuries that followed. Without that trauma, the Islamic world might have retained a more open-minded, pluralistic, and intellectually curious spirit for much longer. The large Christian and Jewish communities within Baghdad would have been spared the massacres, allowing their own ancient traditions and institutions to thrive, contributing to the city's vibrant intellectual tapestry. Now, let's look outward. How would a strong, unified caliphate have dealt with the Crusades? The later waves of crusaders would have faced a far more formidable and unified opponent. Instead of dealing with a patchwork of competing local rulers, they would have faced the combined economic, diplomatic, and military might of the Abbasid Caliphate. It is very likely the Crusader states in the Holy Land would have been expelled much earlier and more decisively, and this brings us to Europe. The European Renaissance was heavily fueled by the rediscovery of classical knowledge that flowed from the Islamic world. In our alternate timeline, that flow becomes a torrent. With an intact and thriving Baghdad continuously producing new scientific and philosophical works, the intellectual awakening in Europe could have been dramatically accelerated. The scientific revolution might have kicked off decades, or even a century, earlier. The relationship wouldn't be one of Europe rising from the ashes of its neighbors, but a more balanced partnership, a dialogue between two powerful and advanced civilizations. Finally, what about the rise of the Ottoman Empire? Historically, the Ottomans filled the power vacuum left by the Mongols and the declining caliphate, eventually conquering Constantinople and claiming the title of caliph for themselves. But with a powerful Abbasid Caliphate still ruling from Baghdad, the Ottomans' path would be completely different. They might have remained a powerful Anatolian state, perhaps as a key ally or even a vassal of the caliph, but it's unlikely they would have achieved the vast, transcontinental empire they did. The last 600 years of world history would look unrecognizable. So, in this alternate world, the Mongol wave breaks before Baghdad. The result? A sustained Islamic Golden Age, a more unified and stable Middle East, an accelerated path of scientific discovery for the entire globe, and a fundamentally different balance of power between East and West. The destruction of Baghdad in 1258 was a true hinge of history. By preventing it, we don't just save a city. We preserve a civilization and change the trajectory of humanity itself. What do you think? What new empires might have risen in the shadow of this powerful caliphate? Could a technologically advanced Islamic world have explored the Americas before Columbus? How much further ahead might we be today? If you enjoyed this journey into alternate history, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest what-ifs of our past. I've got a question for you in the comments. If the Mongols had failed, which world power do you think the Caliphate would have challenged first? Let me know your theories down below. Thanks for watching.